The Galapagos Islands are like no other place on Earth. They survive nearly intact from their distant past, allowing us to step back in time and imagine the dawn of creation. They are the standard by which other islands throughout the world measure themselves. And for this reason, they provide us with the ultimate test. Do we have the will and the wisdom to protect one of the most unique and pristine places on Earth?
There is no other Galapagos. And you see a marine iguana, there is no other marine iguana nowhere else in this world. So the uniqueness of these islands are a world treasure.
You still have the experience of walking in the islands in the middle of a nesting area. The birds are there, that's still there.
I would sum all of that up by saying that Galapagos is a bit like the Mona Lisa. We really need to view it as sort of one of the last major works of art of the natural world.
Born by fire from volcanic activity deep under the ocean, the islands were slowly colonized by life arriving from the outside. Those that survived had to adapt to this isolated world, changing into new forms.
Galapagos is the only oceanic archipelago in the world that maintains 95% of its original biodiversity, both native and endemic. 95% is still present today.
It's the only place in the world where we have almost all the original vertebrate species still here.
As well as being unique, it is the role model for the world still about island restoration, park management, and also, these days, sustainable use of resources.
Travelers planning to visit the Galapagos Islands will have a rich and rewarding experience. Nowhere can you be immersed in the natural world as in Galapagos. But while they still provide a wonderful experience for travelers, behind the scenes, forces are operating that threaten to change the islands forever.
That expansion of human population and investment and development, we can't keep up with it here.
The task we have before us is huge.
And we feel that if we can't protect the Galapagos from the destruction that is taking place worldwide, then we pretty much can give up on any part of the world.
The biodiversity is almost completely intact. What does that mean? It means that we still have the opportunity to either save it or lose it.
You've got the threats and the risks on one hand, but you have the opportunity on the other hand. And I don't think we're going to get another opportunity like this.
Low-impact nature tourism has been the most important reason that Galapagos has remained intact. Yet, an ever-growing human presence is bringing serious new problems.
We are basically the cause of these problems, but we can find ways to tackle them.
There's lots that can be done. A lot of it is to do with funding, a lot of it is to do with political will, and a lot of it is to do with the people visiting Galapagos.
More and more, certainly our work is becoming dependent on the individual donor, be it through a family foundation or through an individual gift. Keep the research going that supports the management, keep the research and technical assistance going that encourages stewardship in the local community. The greatest support will come through the individual experience here in the islands.
Galapagos is unique. You're not going to recreate Galapagos. You cannot recreate Galapagos. And in that sense, it is like comparing it to a single work of art, that there is no other Galapagos, and if you lose it, it's gone.
The most important thing for the long-term protection of Galapagos is that people continue to care about this place. If it becomes just another place somewhere on the planet, That is my greatest fear. The indifference to how special this place is and how easy it would be to protect it if everybody did their little bit and cared.
Yeah, what I always feel when I come back to Galapagos, every time I come back, is that even though there is this sort of tornado of changing events in Galapagos, some things don't change. First of all, the pelicans are still here on the waterfront, and the finches are still singing in the cactus trees, but also the spirit of the visitor hasn't really changed. And that spirit is still very much alive and well in just about every visitor that I bump into, and I think that's really heartwarming to see that, because that is how Galapagos will be saved, is if people care.
Other information on this DVD will help you understand serious threats facing Galapagos, but also the ways that your visit can help protect the islands and make tourism part of the solution. Like all remote oceanic islands, Galapagos developed in a world separated by space and time. This isolation made them unique, but it also made them vulnerable to an ever-growing force.
And that force, in essence, is the globalization of Galapagos. It is the opening up of Galapagos to the outside world. And that's not new for Galapagos either. Galapagos was globalized when the whalers came from Nantucket or from Bristol. That was one way of opening up the Galapagos Islands to the rest of the world. The problem that we're facing now is that that rate of opening up Galapagos is accelerating massively.
The shrinking of our planet brings formerly isolated species of animals and plants into sudden contact. The islands originally had only about 500 species of plants, which took millions of years to become established. Yet, in a matter of decades, hundreds of new species have arrived. Some of these alien invaders, known to biologists as invasive species, have no natural enemies, and left unchecked, they can transform entire ecosystems. Here in the misty highlands on the island of Santa Cruz, there is a rich biodiversity of plant and bird life. But this area is being overrun by an aggressive alien plant that chokes out native vegetation. Rachel Atkinson, a biologist from the Charles Darwin Research Station, is trying to find a way to save this area from being overrun.
This blackberry, its scientific name is Rubus niveus, comes from the Himalayas. It's one of the worst invasive species that we have in Galapagos. Bad because it has such a huge impact. It grows very fast, it smothers all the vegetation, and it's covered in spines, so is also very difficult to work with. One of the biggest curses of this plant is its seed production. So it produces huge numbers of fruits which fall to the ground. The seeds can last in the soil for 20 or up to 100 years. So even if we control the plants that we can see in an area, we have to keep coming back because we have this huge seed bank. This plant, if you turn your back, you've lost the battle. It just grows up to a couple of meters high and nothing can grow underneath it. It's a pretty impressive plant.
But the invasion doesn't stop with plants. At last count, more than 500 alien insect species have arrived in Galapagos. At this laboratory at the Charles Darwin Foundation's research station, biologist Henry Herrera studies a type of fire ant that many biologists believe is the most aggressive insect ever introduced into the islands.
Fire ants are a serious threat because they can kill animals like turtles, iguanas, lizards, and eat the eggs of birds. They're even poisonous to humans, and so they can also affect human health as well. A big problem with fire ants is that they displace native insects in Galapagos. Birds and other animals depend on these insects for their food, and without this food, many species will disappear.
Henry is linked by internet with other researchers around the world, and he uses a special computer program to plot the location of fire ants on a map. Scientists will give information on fire ants to the Galapagos National Park, which carries out eradication and control programs. But perhaps the most dangerous of all invasive species are caused by organisms that can't even be seen.
Right now, if you were in Britain or even in the United States, there's a lot of discussion of the impacts of invasive species. West Nile virus and in fact avian flu, and all of these issues are throughout the world are becoming very important. What happens if those get here? The impact here is going to be devastating.
Unfortunately, in Galapagos, 2 species of mosquitoes have already been introduced onto this island where we are now. One of them is a vector for West Nile virus and avian malaria. The reason why it's all such a problem is that the animals that have evolved on Galapagos or on the islands of Hawaii or in New Zealand is that they've basically been totally isolated from the continental areas where there is a huge warfare going on between diseases and the rest of the animals which live there. And so their immune systems are very, very weak indeed. Should the disease arrive carried by an infected mosquito, you could well be faced with local extinctions of birds. And so the arrival of these diseases can have a catastrophic effect, and we have so much to lose.
But among all the invaders from the outside world that threaten Galapagos, one stands out above the rest.
It's probably the largest tropical archipelago that never had native people. So people are a very, very, very new thing in Galapagos in terms of the evolution of species on the planet.
As in other parts of the world, humans have brought massive change, in effect compressing time and fast-forwarding evolution. One of the greatest impacts has been overharvesting of sea life and illegal industrial fishing in the Galapagos Marine Reserve.
The Marine Reserve is basically an extension that goes around the farthest points of each island and then 40 nautical miles outwards.
There is no fishing allowed within these boundaries unless it's from local artisanal fisheries. So these small fishing boats you see here in the harbors, they're allowed to go out and catch fish in a controlled manner. But obviously, again, because of the profit that can be made from it, and because it's such a big area, there's a lot of illegal fishing that takes place here.
Galapagos is a very rich area. It's full of islands, islets, seamounts, which are perfect areas for tuna, wahoo, and sharks to aggregate about. So it's natural that a lot of these fishing vessels are willing to risk the penalties by entering the marine reserve.
The government of Ecuador, with help from outside conservation organizations, have the huge and growing task of protecting both the marine ecosystems and terrestrial ecosystems on the islands. But they are struggling against a rising tide.
There's a lot of success stories on the uninhabited islands. On the inhabited islands, it's a whole different ballgame, and there the increase in population is unprecedented, and that goes hand in hand with increased demand for resources, especially water, and also increased risk in invasive species.
Galapagos is really in danger because of this growth. Unfortunately, economic alternatives, economic activities that has attracted a lot of people from the mainland.
Remember that Ecuador as a country has a lot of problems. Many millions of Ecuadorians have left the country searching for better lives.
So when a visitor comes here, it's very easy to be lulled into a false sense of security that everything's fine. But everything is only as fine as the next box of cargo arrives.
When I first came to Galapagos 35 years ago, there was one cargo vessel every 6 months which came to the islands, just bringing essential produce. Today we have a vessel every week here, or maybe even 2 vessels every week here, bringing everything which human beings require or believe they require for their existence. And all the containers with Coca-Cola, with meat, with everything can contain diseases, can contain insects, can contain even bigger animals like snakes or green iguanas. This has happened. We know it can happen.
Aquí, en esta área que usted ve aquí,
in this area that you see here, they offload construction materials, they offload vehicles, cartons of tomatoes, potatoes. Also, tourists get off on that pier over there, and they offload materials and trash from tourist boats.
pero no tenemos personal para...
The problem is that we don't have personnel to be vigilant and monitor all this. We don't have personnel for any emergencies. We just work with what we have. When you consider that Galapagos has value for the whole world, it's alarming to see all this being brought in this way. We have a huge job, and we're struggling against something very big here, but we're understaffed, and this is what we face.
The Galapagos Islands offer a wonderful experience for travelers, and well-managed, low-impact nature tourism offers the best way to preserve the islands for future generations. But at the same time, the greatest force of change in Galapagos is the constant growth of tourism.
When we first arrived, there were a few hundred people here, and gradually a few more people came, but it was a very gradual change. And then from about 1970 onwards, when flights began to arrive and tourism began to arrive, everything started to move faster and faster. And the access, as well as the economic opportunities, began to increase so quickly that everything went into a state of flux.
The byproducts of this growth are more human settlement and more invasive species.
There's always something that you can invent and make tourism out of. What it means in Galapagos, though, is more expansion. And more expansion means more development.
That then drives immigration to the islands, but it also drives, and that is a self-reinforcing cycle, and then that also drives the arrival of new invasive species.
And the best way I could put so far Galapagos now is that Galapagos is an open space. in every sense, open for business, open for investors, open for people, open for introduced species, and we need to close that.
If we work together, those who now live in the islands and the travelers who visit can create a strong culture of conservation. Tourism to Galapagos can remain a model of conservation and protect the islands for future generations. Travelers like you will make the critical difference. Conservationists view this type of travel as a way to maintain low-impact tourism without constructing permanent buildings on land. But boats require fuel and resources, and year after year, the impact adds up. So it's important to have the highest standards of operation and the best practices possible.
Tour operators can help, just improving their performance, their environmental performance in the archipelago. They can take care of what they bring to the islands, what they bring for their tourists in terms of food and so on, the maintenance they provide to the engines of the boats, the way they handle the different environmental issues on board their boats and in their operations.
The operators on our side, which are under the scope and being scrutinized, should say, we are willing to go the extra mile. If we have enough operators following rules, setting standards, improving the basic requirements, it's going to create a better Galapagos for tomorrow.
As a traveler, you have a role to play on board your boat as well. There are things you can do to help reduce the impact. Proper waste disposal and recycling are vital in Galapagos. Try to pack light and keep disposable items to a minimum. Don't bring plastic bags unless you intend to take them home. Never throw anything away, even if you think it will sink harmlessly in the ocean. Sea lions can hurt themselves on cans they find at the bottom, and marine turtles can die after eating plastic. Take care of your belongings on deck so nothing is accidentally blown overboard. As a traveler, you're in a good position to observe many of the standards your boat follows. Boats should encourage recycling and should have the proper containers. You should see no leakage of gas or oil from your boat, or the boats used to go ashore. Nothing, including food, garbage, or refuse of any kind, should be thrown overboard. And pumping waste material or chemicals into the sea is strictly prohibited. You should know that fishing on board tourist ships is not permitted by travelers or crew members.
Be the stewards of the marine reserve while you're here, so that means make sure that there's no fishing going on board the tourism vessel, make sure rubbish isn't being dumped overboard, just being aware, I think, of the privilege that we all have of being here.
If you see that good practices are not being followed, don't hesitate to let your guide and boat captain know. And please report it to your tour company when you return home. Tourism is one of the best ways to preserve remote natural areas like the Galapagos Islands. But we know that tourism comes with a price.
Tourism is part of the problem, but I think it's also part of the solution. It's very important that visitors come to Galapagos because each visitor also helps to maintain the park. The park needs visitors and needs good visitors.
But as Galapagos has become more popular, so have the challenges of protecting the islands. Today, well-informed travelers and sound environmental practices are vital if tourism is to be part of the solution and help preserve the islands. This section will give you ideas on how you can help. Ecuador has established the Galapagos National Park to administer the islands and surrounding marine reserve. The park designates special visitor sites for travelers, which total only about 1% of the land area. If not properly managed, visitor sites can become congested, and overuse will cause permanent damage. For this reason, the park allocates a certain number of visitors to each site, which are open from sunrise to sunset. And boats are assigned a fixed itinerary, with a maximum of 2 island visits per day. Your guide is the key to your Galapagos experience. Guides have a wealth of knowledge about the natural history of the islands and make sure visitors know and follow the park rules. Visitor sites are well marked both to protect the environment and to ensure safety. It's important that everyone stay on the trails. Sometimes the reason may not be obvious. For instance, the open space in the background is a nesting area that conceals eggs. There are many things to discover, and sometimes it's tempting to take a souvenir. But no plants, animals, rocks, or anything else may be taken from the islands or the marine reserve. The adage, "Leave only footprints, take only photographs," is very important in Galapagos. Be careful not to leave anything on the islands, and if you notice any refuse, please pick it up. Each year, hundreds of pounds of trash are removed from the seashore, some from inhabited areas in Galapagos, some carried in by sea currents from the open ocean. Part of the magic of Galapagos is that wildlife has no fear of humans. But with thousands of visitors each month, careless behavior could eventually change this, and it can also endanger the welfare of animals. It's important not to feed or attract wildlife with food, on land or in the water. Animals have special nutritional needs, and introducing new foods can harm them. And touching wildlife is potentially harmful as well. Sea lion mothers, for instance, use the unique smell of their pups to identify them. Be mindful about how you approach and interact with wildlife. Don't follow or chase animals, and avoid surrounding them so they don't feel confined or threatened. If you disturb birds, they may abandon their eggs or chicks. Try to keep a distance from birds of 2 meters or more. The Galapagos Islands contain both protected and inhabited areas. When you visit a town, it's good to support the local economy and meet people by purchasing at shops and restaurants. But you can help protect natural areas by not buying items made from animals or sea life, such as black coral, marine tortoise shells, seashells, or these sea lion teeth. Travelers can be an important positive force by shaping and monitoring the best kind of tourism for Galapagos. As a visitor, you can follow good practices, and you can be the eyes and ears for conservation. If you see park rules not being followed, please tell your guide and let your tour company know when you return home. The Galapagos Islands offer a wonderful experience, but remember, you will be traveling in a remote, isolated part of the world, so please be especially mindful of your safety. Some larger boats may have a doctor on board, but for the most part, only basic first aid will be available. If you have a serious injury or medical problem, there will be a long journey to get proper care. Accidents can result from sudden boat movements, rough seas, slippery surfaces, loose rocks, and other hazards. So please take care in all your activities.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the alarm.
Safety starts on the first day. There should be a safety drill before your boat gets underway. It should include a sounding of the general alarm, hands-on demonstrations of safety equipment, and a briefing on evacuation procedures.
Only for 2 weeks. We hope to be rescued before that happens.
On board your boat, hold on to railings and take special care on decks and stairways, especially when the sea is rough. On island visits, be careful when boarding and leaving boats. There will often be slippery rocks, and sometimes you may be in rough surf. Take your time and grab onto arms that are offered for support. And be sure to keep your life jacket on while getting off and on boats. You may be walking several miles a day over rough surfaces, sometimes up and down hills. Sturdy hiking shoes give more ankle support and a more secure grip for loose rocks, even the occasional iguana or sea lion. Be careful around sea lions. They're cute, but they can bite, especially the large males or beach masters, which can be aggressive. At some times of the year, dehydration can be a problem. Plan to take a water bottle when you leave the boat. In general, if you're not sure of your fitness or have any questions about the difficulty of a land excursion, don't hesitate to ask your guide. Swimming and snorkeling in Galapagos is a wonderful experience, and by observing some simple guidelines, you can be safe. There should be a briefing on water conditions at each location, and your guide and boat crew should carefully monitor your swimming and snorkeling. Galapagos waters often have strong currents, and the surf near the shore can be strong at times as well. So choose your water activities according to your strength as a swimmer. If you're unsure, you can always stay in calm and shallow waters and wear a life jacket. As always, use the buddy system and check on each other frequently. Stay close to your group, into the shore or boat, and frequently look around to get your bearings, because you may be in a current. Make sure that your guide and your boat drivers constantly monitor swimming and snorkeling activities and give basic instructions and hand signals to use in the water. Unfortunately, there are some boats that do not provide adequate supervision. Safety in the Galapagos Islands should be a priority for you, your guide, and your boat crew. If you feel that good safety practices are not being followed, please let your guide know, and be sure to report this to your tour company as soon as you return home. The greatest threat to the unique plants and animals of the Galapagos Islands are pests and diseases introduced from the outside world. Even the transfer of plants, seeds, and animals from one island to another poses a threat, as each island has its own unique ecosystem.
Previously, the barrier for Galapagos was the oceanic waters between Galapagos and the mainland. With the ever-increasing air traffic, the ever-increasing boat traffic, we have broken that barrier.
What you end up with is many more cargo boats, aeroplanes, etc., coming to the islands, bringing boxes full of we don't know what, and that's the problem.
The introduction of alien organisms threatens the biodiversity and economy of Galapagos, and even human health. Scientists are hard at work identifying and tracking invasive species, but their task is made difficult by the movement of tens of thousands of travelers into and around the islands. But travelers can play an important role in protecting the islands from invasive species. You can avoid bringing things into Galapagos that would be a potential threat, such as plants, seeds, and food. An inspection begins before you leave on your flight. Your luggage will be scanned for organic materials at the airport. The process continues on board your aircraft. Spraying cabin compartments is an important way to prevent plagues of West Nile virus, avian flu, and other insect-borne diseases. If these were to arrive in Galapagos, it could cause a tragic destruction of animal populations.
Okay, thank you. Hola, hello.
After arriving in the islands, a quarantine inspector will check your bags.
Morning. Please you have any fruits, plants, flowers, seeds?
Be sure to declare any kind of organic product you might have. Fruits, vegetables, plants, flowers, food of any type. This may include something you purchased at a local market prior to your Galapagos visit. Produce, or even products made from plants or animals, may carry seeds, viruses, insects, or other invaders. You can also help prevent alien species from being transferred between islands. Don't take food with you on your island visits, and make sure to clean your shoes and clothes of all soil, sand, and seeds before returning to your boat. Insects from one island are often attracted by the lights on a boat, and these insects, especially mosquitoes, can be transported to other areas. Special lights should be installed on boats to prevent this. If you see that these practices are not being followed, please let your guide know, and also report it to your tour company when you return home.